Hi everyone, welcome back. Today is a very special day, as we'll talk about. Before we start, I'd just like to mention that I do videos besides this one on Thursday on YouTube. I also do videos on Tuesday and Friday. Friday is usually on the Torah portion of the week, and Tuesday are more relevant topics and the different topics in general. They can be all found on YouTube. Check out Rabbi Moshe Leider on YouTube or Chabad of University City, and you'll be able to go in there. The ones on Tuesday and Friday are quite short. They're usually about 5, 7, 8 minutes long, and of course this one is much longer. And I'm getting some very positive responses. A lot of people are tuning in. A lot of people are expressing their opinions about these videos, both positive and negative, which is good to hear different responses for it. Anyways, this is a special day. It is the Yortzeit, the anniversary of the passing of the Rebbe's wife, Rebbe Chaim Mushka Schneerson. And from her life, we can learn many, many things about how holy people live and how we should live, how we can emulate their lives. The Rebbetzin was the third daughter of the previous Lubavitch Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, and his wife Nechamedina. She was born in Russia, and she came to America with her husband in 1942, her husband being the Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. She had two other sisters, and one of them died in the Holocaust, and the other one came to America together with her, and her husband was very active and the head of the Lubavitch Yeshiva network. So she was a very special lady. Her name was Chaim Mushka, or Chaim Musia, and many, many, many girls are named after her. After she passed away, the name Chaim Mushka is a very, very popular name in Chabad. I'm sure many of you know Chaim Mushka in your own community as well. Let's talk a little bit about her, because at this time, women all over the world are getting together for Farbrengens today. Instead of gatherings in New York, where they usually have mass gatherings and women's conventions on Chof Shvat, they're going to be doing it all online, on Zoom and on broadcasts on the computer, etc. So, but nevertheless, a lot of Farbrengens will be going on, Torah will be studied, prayers will be said in her honor. Just last night in San Diego, there was a Farbrengen as well, and I'm sure there'll be more activities also. So, she passed away in 1988. She was married to the Rebbe for 60 years before she passed away. They were childless, and people would ask the Rebbe, how do you feel about the fact you had never had any children? And the Rebbe would say, all the Hasidim are my children. The Rebbetzin was a very private person, as is the custom by very great people. When she would make an order at the grocery store, she would simply call herself Mrs. Schneerson from President Street. She wouldn't say, I'm the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe's wife, nothing like that. I am Mrs. Schneerson from President Street. And sometimes the person who answered the phone and took the order didn't exactly know who Mrs. Schneerson from President Street was. But quickly they found out. She did not go out much. She stayed in her house a lot because she didn't like the publicity and the attention that she would get. She never went to shul. Very, very rarely did she go to shul, because of course all the attention would be focused on her, and she didn't want that. She would go out. She had one of the rabbis drove her around to get some fresh air every once in a while. She would drive around Manhattan, Brooklyn. In those days, the air was cleaner, and she appreciated it, as her father also enjoyed the clean, fresh air of going out on a drive on a summer afternoon or sometime. And she would drive, just enjoy being driven around in anonymity, no one knowing who she was. And there were many stories about her in these trips that she took. One of them was a very beautiful story that comes to mind. They were driving down the street in Brooklyn, New York, where they lived, and she noticed that movers were taking all the furniture out of a house, and they were putting it out in the street. and there was an older woman who was sitting there by the furniture crying. The Rebbitzin asked her driver to please pull over, and he did, and he asked him to go over and see what the commotion's all about, what's going on over there. So the driver went and found out what was going on. This poor woman was being evicted. She was a Russian Jew. She was being evicted for her home because she couldn't afford to pay the rent. She owed back rent. So he told the Rebbitzin. The Rebbitzin said, "How much does she owe?" He went back. It turned out it was something like $5,000, which was in the late 1940s an awful lot of money. And she wrote a check for $5,000. She said it didn't have her name on it. Many times in those days, the checks didn't have her name on it. So she gave her the check to the driver and told the driver to give it to her, the lady, and not to tell her who it was from. And he did. He gave the check to the lady, paid all the bills, and then they drove past. No one was to ever know who it was. The Rebbitzin, even though she was a private person, she did enjoy having company. Especially, she enjoyed having young girls who would come to Crown Heights and became newly observant, the Bali Tshuva. She was very close to the school, Machon Chana, which is now called Machon Liyadus, in Crown Heights, which caters to girls with a limited background. And she enjoyed very much playing host to them. And the girls would come to her house, a few at a time, and she would serve them coffee or tea and cookies. And she would want to know about them. Now, they were very obviously quite intimidated by her. Here she was, the Rebbitzin herself. But she wanted to know about them. She wanted to know about their background and what they're learning and how they're adjusting to life in a religious neighborhood, especially in Crown Heights. And she really enjoyed that very, very much. The girls would very often come to her every Erev Pesach, every Eve of Pesach, to wish her a good Yontif, and she really, truly, very much enjoyed that, very, very much. Of course, she was very devoted to her husband, the Rebbe. The Rebbe was very devoted to her. In fact, every evening the Rebbe would go home, and she would stay up waiting for him, and even after some of the long Verbrengans in Crown Heights, which could last till 1 o'clock in the morning or even 2 o'clock in the morning sometimes, the Rebbitzin was always there for him when he came home, gave him something to eat, and comforted him after a long, long evening. And he truly appreciated it. He was very, very close to her. And her death really hit him very, very hard. For the first time, the Hasidim were privy to go into the Rebbe's house on President Street. That very private house, that tall house near Brooklyn Avenue and President Street. And they were able to go in. How? Because when the Rebbetzin passed away, the Rebbe sat Shiva for her. And he sat Shiva in the house, and services were held in the house, but not just during the 7 days of Shiva, for the entire year. So the Rebbe ended up to be there for the entire year. He spoke from there, he davened from there, and people would come in, throngs of people would come into the house and comfort the Rebbe and daven with the Rebbe. When the Rebbetzin passed away, I rushed quickly, along with some of my colleagues here from San Diego. We rushed to New York as fast as we could to get there for the funeral. Unfortunately, we just missed it. It was a very big rush. We just missed it. And we went to the cemetery, in the Montefiore Cemetery in Queens, New York, and there was nobody there. And we saw a mound of stones where the Rebbetzin was buried. And we had an opportunity for some very quiet personal time together with the Rebbetzin at that time, just the few of us who came on our own. And that was very emotional for me, to have that connection, that closeness with our Rebbetzin. She was our Rebbetzin. So after that, we rushed back to Crown Heights to join the Rebbe for the afternoon services. And we got there, and there was literally a line around the corner. We were able to get into the house and we daven with the Rebbe Mincha, and then after Mincha, we walked past the Rebbe and offered the Rebbe the traditional condolences of may God comfort you among the mourners of Zion in Jerusalem. Hamakim Yinachem Eschem B'Sol Sha'ar Ve'el Tzion Yerushalayim. We looked at the Rebbe, we offered those words, and we moved on and gave an opportunity for others to do the same. I looked at the Rebbe's eyes. Now, the Rebbe's eyes were very famous, very well known. People would say the Rebbe's eyes were magical. They were remarkable. They had just an incredible power to them. This time, the Rebbe's eyes were sad. There was a sadness as if the Rebbe had been crying. I looked at the Rebbe's eyes, and I looked at him, and I felt sad also that his life mate, his Ezer Kenegdo, his helpmate throughout all these 60 years, was now in Olam HaEmes, in the world of truth. And after we finished offering the condolences to the Rebbe, the way the line went in the house was that it circled around and it went through the kitchen and then out the door. And thousands of people came to offer the Rebbe condolences, and we all went through that same line in that same configuration. And it was the first time any of us had ever been in the Rebbe's house. And it gave us a very good idea of the type of life that they led. The Rebbe, who was the worldwide leader of the Chabad movement, who could have had the very best of everything. We know many Hasidic Rebbe's live in style, incredible, opulent, majestic style. Well, we walked past the Rebbe's kitchen, through the kitchen, and I was very surprised. It was as if it was a kitchen of 50 years ago. The appliances were that old, very, very old. And the kitchen was very simple, and the tiles on the floor were old and stained, and it was just a very old kitchen. No one had ever done any fixing up of this kitchen. It was like a poor kitchen, and I thought to myself, this really says a great deal about how the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin lived. They lived very, very, very simply. The physical world had really no attraction to them. They survived in a very plain, simple way. A very, very plain way. The house was an old house. It was a large house, very comfortable, but old and very simple and very old-fashioned. Because great people are not really concerned so much about fashion, about gashmias, about materialism, but rather they simply live for godliness. They live for spirituality. And indeed, that's who she was. That's who she was. Many years later, there was a famous court case of some books that were taken illegally from the Rebbe's library in 770. And there was a court case, and they needed to depose the Rebbetzin. They needed to formally ask her questions. They were going to depose the Rebbe, but at the end, thank God they didn't. It wouldn't have been respectful to do that. But they did depose the Rebbetzin. And you can go online on the internet and see that deposition by lawyers as they asked the Rebbetzin questions that no one had ever asked a Rebbetzin, or certainly a Chabad Rebbetzin, before. And the woman answered strikingly. She answered, it was the first time any of us really had even seen her. I had studied in Crown Heights for some 6 years. I never even knew what the woman looked like. I'd never seen her. But in this particular internet piece, this deposition, you could see who she was. She was very simple. She was an elderly woman by this time. She was wearing a tichel, a plain scarf. She spoke with a Yiddish accent, a strong Yiddish accent, but with clear English. And in this incredible deposition, she talked about a Rebbe and what a Rebbe is, and the dedication that a Rebbe has to his Chasidim. And when she was asked, who does the Rebbe belong to? because this was in connection with the books, the Rebbe's books. Do the Rebbe's books belong to the Rebbe? Are they the possession of the Rebbe or of the movement? She answered remarkably that the books do not belong to the Rebbe. They belong to the Hasidim. They belong to the movement. Just as the Rebbe himself does not belong to himself, he belongs to the movement. That the Rebbe himself, and she pointed out her father as an example of that he was so completely dedicated to Chabad that he and Chabad were one. He had nothing that he owned was his own. Completely. He was completely one with the movement, with Chabad. And the same thing was true of her husband. And she would tell of his dedication to the Hasidim and how everything that he was and everything he owned belonged to Chabad. And therefore, of course, the books were not his own, not his family's books. There was a nephew that wanted to take the books away based on the fact that he felt it belonged to the family. No, she said, it did not belong to the family. It belonged to Chabad. It belonged to Chabad. And this obviously was so strong and so convincing that Chabad won the court case as a result of it. That's an incredible thing to see this woman, how frail and how gentle, but at the same time how powerful and magnificent she was, and what she must have been like. The Rebbe regarded her as a queen to her entire life. And he had the greatest respect for her and the greatest love for her. And he made sure that he would always spend time with her every single day. He was always with her every single day. People who were close to the Rebbe and the Rebbitzin would remark at how much the Rebbe would spend time with her and be there for her and take care of her and regard her. So she was quite a remarkable person. As I said, many thousands and tens of thousands and perhaps hundreds of thousands of young girls are named after her. And the legacy of the Rebbitzin continues to this day. And we learn about her, we talk about her, and we guide our lives, especially for women, based on her remarkable example. Anyways, we have some time left. Let's learn some sichos from the Rebbe, from the Parsha of Yisro. This coming Shabbos is a very special Parsha, the Parsha of Yisro, which was named after Moshe's father-in-law, his wife Zipporah's father, whose name was Yisro. He actually had 7 different names. And it is the Parsha of the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments are found, in fact, it's a very great honor to get the Aliyah of the 10 Commandments, which are mentioned in this Parsha. And the question comes up that the Rebbe asks, and many others ask as well, why was the most important Parsha probably of the Torah, the Parsha of the 10 Commandments, why was it given in a Parsha with the name of a Gentile, Yisro? He started off as a Gentile before he converted. Not only was he a Gentile, he was the greatest idolater who ever lived. We are told that Yisro knew every form of idolatry that existed. And he worshipped every form of idolatry. He was familiar with each one of them. There was no one greater than him in idolatry. So why is it that he gets the name of the Parsha of the 10 Commandments? I often ask, if there was a fundraiser, we should make a fundraiser. And the fundraiser should be that we will give the naming rights for a Parsha in the Torah for whoever gives the most amount of money for our synagogue or our cause. Who wouldn't contribute? And would there be any limit to the amount of money you would contribute to have a Parsha in the Torah named after you forever and ever? And what a Parsha! How about the greatest Parsha of all would be the Parsha of the giving of the Torah itself? We'd make an auction, and we would entertain bids. Who wouldn't bid for that incredible honor of having your name on this week's Parsha? It's an incredible thing. I know everyone would just die to do this, to have their name. But it didn't work that way. Whose name was given for this Parsha? Yisro, a non-Jew. A non-Jew. Oh, granted, he was Moshe's father-in-law, but he was a non-Jew. And we see this by other Parshas as well, named after very dubious figures. Noah, who built a boat and sailed away while humanity died and drowned. Or Korach, who rebelled against Moses and died in a horrible pit in the ground. Chai Sarah, who talks about not the life of Sarah, but the death of Sarah, how she passed away in that Parsha. And we find Balak, who wanted to curse the Jews. So Parshas generally do not seem to be named after such prominent people or events. There is no Parsha named Abraham or Yitzchak or Yaakov, remarkably. There is no Parsha named Moshe. No Parsha at all. There's a Parsha of Pinchas, who was Moshe's nephew, who was a murderer. He killed a Jewish prince who was having relations with a Midianite princess. But there's no Parsha named after the very illustrious figures in the Torah. But these dubious figures get Parshas named after them. Why is that? So I think one of the reasons is because the Torah is not about accomplishment. The Torah is about effort. How much effort does it take? Taking someone who came from a background which was not a very good background, and they raised themselves up to do something very courageous and very good and very honorable. Even Korach, who was the rebel against Moshe, the first misnagid, but nevertheless his children and his grandchildren ended up doing teshuvah, and we have many psalms named after them. Mizmor, Shir, Livnei Korach, Mizmor, a psalm of the children of Korach. The great prophet Shmuel, Hanavi, Samuel, was a direct descendant of Korach. Balak, well, Ruth and Mashiach come from Balak. Noah ended up saving humanity by his sailing away, and humanity comes from him, etc. So we find that each one of the people that are named, that are Parshas named after them, had a remarkable end, either in their lifetime or later on after their lifetime. And so it was with Yisro. Yisro, as I mentioned, started off as a not good person. His daughter Tzipporah ended up marrying Moshe, and Yisro converted to Judaism. Rashi says he heard two things. He heard about the war with Amalek, how the Jews were miraculously saved from Amalek, and he heard about the crossing of the sea and how unbelievably the Jews crossed the sea and the Egyptians drowned beneath the sea. And these two incredible events shaped his very existence. Why these two events? First of all, the story of Amalek was a story of bravery, that the Jewish people went into battle with Amalek, the wicked nation of Amalek, and with God's help, they were victorious. This showed Yisro that the power of the Jewish people against their enemies. But the splitting of the sea was a different situation. When he heard about the splitting of the sea, he saw indeed that it was nothing that the Jews did to deserve it. Amalek, they fought. They were warriors. They fought a battle. With the splitting of the sea, Moshe literally lifted up his arms, and the sea opened, and then they crossed, and the Egyptians came across, and they were drowned. Nothing that the Jews did at all, that they deserved, that they merited, had anything to do with it. And with this, Yisro saw that the Jews have a special blessing from God, whether they participate in that blessing, as they did with Amalek, or they don't participate in that blessing, as happened in the splitting of the sea. But nevertheless, God's special blessing rests on the Jews, and the Jewish people are indeed a mamleches kohanim, a nation of kings, the goy kadosh, and a holy nation. And he was able to see that, and he said, therefore, I want to go with the Jewish people. I want my fate should be with the Jews. I want to go, and I want to become a Jew as well. So his name was Yisro, or he's different, called by different names, Ruel, Yeser, Yisro. But nevertheless, he became the father-in-law of Moshe, and Moshe gave him the greatest respect of all. We learn, as a matter of fact, how to treat a father-in-law, or a mother-in-law for that matter, in the way that Moshe treated Yisro, even though he was the leader of the Jewish people. He served Yisro. Yisro gave him advice about judgment and how to judge people and how to assign different judges for different groups. And Moshe took his advice diligently. So Yisro turns out to be a very great person, even though he had very, very low beginnings. So let's learn a few seichos dealing with the Parsha of Yisro. The Torah says, "V'yichan sham Yisrael neged hahar." Very well-known verse. The Jewish people there encamped opposite the mountain. Of course, it's talking about the mountain of Sinai, where they were about to get the Torah. They camped there, and Rashi says, of course, that they did it ki'ish echad b'lev echad, like one person with one heart. So the Rebbe says the Bnei Yisrael's encampment opposite Mount Sinai is described by the Torah using the singular verb vayichan. He camped, not they camped. And he camped. Rashi explains again that it denotes that the Bnei Yisrael camped at Sinai in perfect unison. They were all one, as one man with one heart, harmoniously readying themselves to receive the Torah. And from this we learn unity, Jewish unity, and how we all are in this together. We all should be together. So Rashi, though, interestingly, offers a similar explanation on the verse, "And behold, Egypt was advancing behind them." When I was talking about the sea, when they were blocked in by the sea. So there it says, "And Egypt was advancing behind them," where the Torah uses a singular verb again, nisa, to describe the thousands, nosea, to describe the thousands of Egyptians who pursued the Bnei Yisrael after they left Egypt. There too, Rashi explains that the Egyptians were united altogether, as an army needs to be united. And what does it say there? Ke lev echad, ki ish echad. They were unified with one heart, as with one man, in their pursuit of the Jewish people. Now there, you notice, is something a little different. When the Egyptians were pursuing the Jews, it said first that they were with one heart, and then with as one person. But when the Jews sit at Mount Sinai, it says the opposite. There was one person, one man, with one heart. What's the difference here? That's the difference. So the distinction the Rebbe says highlights a significant difference between the two types of unity. There are two types of unity. The people of Egypt were obviously a diverse group. as the Torah itself distinguishes them between the average Egyptians and the sorcerers, and between those who feared the word of God and those who did not. We know that when the Egyptians came to the sea, they died in different ways. Some died as lead, some died as straw. Different ways that they died depending on the cruelty, the wickedness of the different people. So they were all quite different, but they were united in one thing, and that was their feelings of hatred for the Jews. In that, their heart, they were all united. They were united in their hatred of Bnei Israel. Their mutual feeling of animosity towards the Jewish people with one heart led to the unification as one man. They became united as one man or one army because of the hatred that they felt, which is an emotional thing. But the Jewish people were different. The Jewish people, their unity in their preparation for giving of the Torah was not merely a uniform action as a shared feeling. Rather, their mutual feelings, the Rebbe said, were due to an even deeper unity. How did they have this deep feeling of closeness to God and holiness? How did they do that? Because they had a strong identity as Jews. Because they had a unity among themselves. There was a tremendous love of each other and a connection with each other. That Jewish oneness as one man is what caused the Jewish people to share equal feelings of anticipation and desire to receive the Torah with one heart, despite their individual differences. So for the Jewish people, they were able to bury their individual differences, their disagreements with each other, to come together. And as a result of that, they were able to have one heart and to join together. But it was only because they had that unity among themselves altogether. And the Egyptians were exactly the opposite. The Egyptians were motivated by their hatred of the Jews, first and foremost, and that caused them to join together as an army. And that's why the Jewish people were at a much higher level. And the lesson we learn is a very beautiful, very important lesson, and that is that we all need to have Ahavas Yisrael. We all need to have a love of our fellow. We all need to be unified and to bury our differences and our disagreements among people. There may be people that we don't like. In any community, in any synagogue, you're going to find people you don't like. And you wonder, are these people really Jews? How can I possibly daven with them? How can I pray together and feel the closeness of God among people I really don't like? And the answer is, first like them, then pray. Do you think God is going to accept our prayers if they are together with people that we dislike? People that we are angry with, people that we hate? Are these the prayers that God is going to accept from us? I don't think so. So the fact is that if we're going to pray, certainly there are going to be challenges. There are going to be people that we don't like. In every group, there's always people we don't like. And there's no question, but because people are different. People are different. There are different qualities that people have. I may be more emotional, you may be more intellectual. I may like music more, you may like art more. I dress in a certain way, and you may not care for the way I dress. You may feel that it's not respectful to dress in this particular way when you go to synagogue. It may not be for you or appropriate for you. But nevertheless, we can't judge people. That we have to educate people, certainly. But at the same time, we have to recognize that we are all in this together. We are all Jews as one. We are all Jews as one. You know, when the Jews are marching into the gas chambers, think about it. Did they all like each other? It's very likely there were people who were walking down that path to their death that they knew, perhaps from Germany. Many of them came on trains from the same location, and they spent days and sometimes weeks in those terrible cattle cars, as we just observed last week, Holocaust Memorial Day. And they came off those cattle cars, and I'm sure there were among them, among the hundreds of people in a cattle car, there were many people who knew each other from their city, and they didn't like them. They just didn't care for them. They didn't socialize with them. They had nothing in common with them. But when it came down to that march, that infamous march to their death, they went arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder, with everyone, whether they liked them or not. And they all went to their death together. And they all responded together the words of the Shema Yisrael and the Ani Mamin, I believe with perfect faith in the coming of Mashiach. They all said it together with people they liked and people they didn't like, no matter who it was. And they did it emotionally and with feeling and with fervor, with people they didn't like. So we should think about that. The next time we meet people who we don't care for, and we don't want anything to do with them, keep in mind that they are still our brethren. They are still fellow Jews. They have that godly spark inside of them just like we do. And sometimes we find, remarkably, that we are actually related to them. And how remarkable it is that we are actually even possibly related, because the truth is all Jews are related to each other. We're all children of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So we all come from the same place, the same neighborhood. We all join together with each other, everyone. And it's an incredible thing. So let's continue with a second sikha, a second idea. Just one more. The Torah says, "V'hi b'yom hashlishi," on the third day, B'yos haboker, when it was morning, v'hi kolos ubrakim, there was thunder and lightning. V'yichad kol ha'am asher b'machanem, and all of the people, they shuddered, they trembled. They were about to receive the Torah, and it was a remarkable. Now, what happened? The people came to Mount Sinai, and when they were ready, they prepared themselves. They went to the mikveh, they separated men from women, they did the necessary teshuvah. Then all of a sudden there was a sound and light show, the greatest sound and light show that they ever experienced in history. Thunder, lightning, it was powerful. Let me ask the question, was it really necessary to have such a sound and light show? Was this necessary? After all, they were about to receive the word of God. They were about to hear God himself say, "I am the Lord your God that took you out of the land of Egypt. You shall have no other gods before me." And we are told that these two of the Ten Commandments, the first two, were so powerful, were so awesome, that the Jews said, "Enough, we can't handle anymore, we can't take anymore. It is just too much for us to handle." And therefore Moshe received the rest of the commandments, and then he taught them to the Jews. So if the Jewish people experienced the first two commandments in such an incredible way, why did they need shock and awe? Why did they need thunder and lightning? I'm sure the thunder and lightning was so powerful, agreed, but was it really necessary? Since they received the power of God. And the Rebbe explains what happened at Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, before Mount Sinai, they say the physical world was physical and the spiritual world was spiritual. And there was no connection, no unity among them. Hashemayim, Shemayim, Lashem, V'ha'aretz Nasan Lifnei Adam. The heavens were the heavens of God, God's abode, and the earth was the abode of man. When Moshe went up and God came down, there was a unity that happened that never happened before in history, where for the first time the godliness, spirituality could come into physicality, that the physical world now could be imbued with godliness as holiness. Before that, it wasn't. The tefillin that Avraham wore were not holy except the time that he wore them. They had no intrinsic holiness to them whatsoever. A book that they studied from, a holy book, a Torah book, had no holiness at all. But when the Torah was given, for the first time in history, holiness could now come into a physical object. And the physical object could be endowed with that holiness. Now, a pair of tefillin is holy, whether it's put on or not. A Torah is holy, whether it's used or not. A book, a chumash, a siddur, is holy, whether it's used or not, whether someone uses it or not. If it goes bad, you have to put it away. You can't destroy it or burn it. You need to bury it out of respect because it has holiness to it. A mezuzah, similarly, is a holy object for the first time. So what happened was when the thunder and the lightning came down, it was physical thunder and physical lightning. And what was happening at that point, the Rebbe points out, is that the world itself was being transformed into a holy place for the first time ever. And the thunder and the lightning represented that, bringing it into the world, into the holy place. And that was the purpose of the thunder and the lightning. So let us understand for ourselves that the world is a godly place, a holy place, and our job is to transform the world and make it into a godly place for us, for our families, and for all those around us. So I want to wish you all a very good week and a good Shabbos tomorrow night. Shalom. We'll see you next week.
Shkoch.